to boycott?
Yeah, listen, believe me, if you think that I got into this thinking that wouldn't happen, you're out of your mind. People are very opinionated about this, and it's almost like in the COVID thing, right? Through COVID, what did I say during COVID? Somebody's got to be first. And there were reasons why I felt we could be first going through COVID. Knew that we
to follow up on this story, and I had a feeling that I was going to need to, because obviously reactions have came out since the UFC decided to sign a $100 million contract with Bud Light. And of course, a lot of people were saying, maybe you should have chosen Coors, maybe you should have chosen Yuengling, you should have chosen another beer company. But the reason why I'm doing this video is to ask the question, was this a move that, quite frankly, could possibly rehabilitate and save said particular company? The reason why I worded it this way is because there are some people out there who are actually embracing it for the purposes of, putting the company on blast. We'll get to that here soon, because it was a UFC middleweight champion, Strickland, who brought this up in a Twitter post, well, actually an Instagram post that he did earlier today. We'll get to that here soon, but you guys obviously saw a little bit of an interview that Dana White did, of course, to combat all the narratives that are coming from fans who are obviously upset about this. But there's a lot of reactions here. Now, guys, I asserted in my last video on this topic that I think that there's actually a level of desperation by Dana White to do this. But I do want to go ahead and address something before I get to this actual little 2-minute and 40-second clip that Dana put out, or this response he had to everybody basically saying, look, we're going to boycott the UFC, we're done. And this is what I want to say. At one point in time, Anheuser-Busch used to be a company that stood for American values. Now, there are a lot of people who work for Anheuser-Busch that obviously still do, but they're mostly at the lower level. What happened is that over time, Anheuser-Busch began to bring in more and more people who were not exactly in touch with the, let's just say, the consumer base of Anheuser-Busch products. I spoke at length about this during the whole Dylan Mulvaney debacle, but here we are once again kind of reiterating this, and you have to ask yourself a question. Did anybody who decided to make this deal get the memo? But of course, there are people out there who actually think it's a brilliant move because it may can save Anheuser-Busch or Bud Light as a brand. I'm not so sure that's the case. And that right there is what we're going to be breaking down in this video here. Now, Anheuser-Busch. I remember at one point in time, the Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. By the way, there's also the one in Tampa, Florida, too, which I think is the bigger one. I haven't actually been in. I drove by it a couple of times, but for whatever reason, I chose not to go in there. Maybe I'll do it someday. I don't know. It depends on what happens here. But the thing is this right here. Anheuser-Busch at one point in time used to actually stand for people. They used to stand for veterans. They even had a Salute the Vets, a Salute the Heroes program where you got a discount for going. The values, of course, Budweiser used to have all these patriotic commercials, and we all remember what happened with the whole Dylan Mulvaney thing. And Anheuser-Busch thought for whatever reason that they could just simply do that and just continue on like nothing even mattered, like nothing actually happened. And a lot of people were more upset about the fact that Anheuser-Busch did not actually apologize. I asserted in all of those videos that if Anheuser-Busch had simply apologized for what happened, then maybe what people would just simply do was just say that Anheuser-Busch went through a bit of a gay stage. We forgive them, but of course we're going to kind of hold it against them, especially given all the nonsense that was going on at the time. But then things began to snowball, and you began to find out that they were sponsoring these child pride events. They were sponsoring all these child drag shows. They were sponsoring all this stuff, and ultimately people eventually lost respect for that company. The UFC. And I've been watching the UFC for years. I haven't really watched it that much recently. The price of the events, the pay-per-view events, is like $70, $80. Some cases even $90. I don't think the ESPN Plus package, and of course we're now finding out that people are unsubscribing from ESPN Plus, which was to be expected in UFC Fight Pass, which I think in a lot of ways UFC Fight Pass was being unsubscribed from because, let's just be honest, it's too much to maintain and you don't even get all the benefits they claim that they're going to give you. It's not like you're actually watching pay-per-view events. And now that the UFC's biggest moneymaker, John Jones, is injured, you got to think to yourself, maybe Dana White did this. And of course, the injury occurred after this thing was signed. So I want to add a little bit more context before we go any further and we get to this. The UFC, for the most part, has been sponsored by Modelo, and people automatically thought themselves, okay, well, they decided to go with Modelo, not exactly an American beer brand, but then again, though, at the same time, it's not like U.S. beer brands were, let's just say, were not exactly matching up with the rest of what Dana was probably looking for as far as payment was concerned for fighters and overall sponsorship deals. Now, $100 million, that's a lot of money. It sounds like a lot. But then again, at the same time, a lot of people, when they hear this, they have reactions like what I'm about to show you now.
Dana. I know you say you don't give a fuck what people think. This is the wrong decision, dude. But it's easy to walk away from the UFC because the fights are looking rigged as it is anyway. If you look at every fight, it looks like the refs have rigged it in some kind of way. So to boycott UFC, nothing different. I know you don't care about my opinion. I know you got more money to squash me with your wallet. But I'm an American, and we ain't going for that shit. So, Bud Light. And now, UFC is what it is. I said what I said.
So UFC, Dana White made this deal with Bud Light and said that they share core values. Last time I checked with Bud Light, their core values were having very adult events with children involved. And most of us have boycotted Bud Light. It's easier for me. I don't drink. But the idea that you're going to support a company that does that and targets children with Dylan Mulvaney and with their average viewer being 15 years old and doing beer commercials for them, no thanks. UFC, you're done. We need to boycott them. At this point, I would rather watch street beefs on YouTube or Rumble or wherever it's at. But yeah, boycott UFC. I can't believe that you would sell. I mean, I get it. 100 million is a lot of money. But is Dana White not already insanely wealthy? What is he going to do with another 100 million? And this is the guy that had Trump and Kid Rock out there, you know? I don't get it. But all I know is I won't support UFC in the future until that changes.
Two reactions, and of course, many people were automatically going to say exactly what one of those guys said. Why did you not consider Yingling? And by the way, Yingling had an opportunity when it came to one of these events that I mentioned earlier, and they actually put a stop to it. They said anybody of a certain age is below a certain age. You're not going to do this. We're not going to sponsor it unless the people in the actual room, in the building, in the event itself are of a certain age. Now, I want to go ahead and make this abundantly clear, especially before we get to Dana White and we get to Sean Strickland and all that stuff there. I want to go ahead and make this abundantly clear. I do not care what you do in the privacy of your own home. I do not care what happens in bars as long as children are not present. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I don't go to strip clubs. I got out of that stage when I was much younger. When I was like in my 18, 19, I was in the Marines, for example. Obviously, I went to the bar a little bit. Of course, every now and again, you go to one of these places. But after a while, you realize this is a great big giant money pit, and you're spending your money on girls who don't want anything to do with you. So after a while, you grow up, you smarten up. In my case, it was my early 20s. You don't go there anymore. However, that there being said, I'm not against those places actually being able to operate as long as they don't have little children or kids or people who are underage going in there. That's just my rule on that. It's the same exact thing with the drag bars and stuff. I don't care if these places operate, but of course, after we saw what was going on in Fort Worth, Texas, with little kids being brought in and parents bringing their children in there, you got to ask yourself a question: do these places need to even operate? I would say that I think the parents are more responsible for what's going on in this situation because the parents are actually carrying their children there. The parents are the ones who more likely should be punished in this case, even though the bars, of course, you could possibly shut them down. Of course, that there being the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, for whatever reason, he chose not to do that. Still, at the same time, parents should not have been carrying these kids to these events. Ever since then, of course, when Bud Light decided to use Dylan Mulvaney, the brand itself has been completely tainted, and nobody wants anything to do with it. But still, at the same time, Dana White's justification for all this. Now, let's roll this, okay? Let's go ahead and roll this, and let's see exactly what was really actually said here before we go any further.
The story. But when it comes to Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light, this was everybody talks about, oh, you did it for money. Hey, dummies, all sponsorship deals are about money, okay? So when you talk about being a sellout, I had multiple deals in front of me. So it's not like, oh, Bud Light showed up and they were the only option I had to get money. You know how fucking stupid that is to think that, this was all about, and I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again, everybody on every side of this deal that were involved, other beer companies and everything else, absolutely positively know that this was not about money for me. We were going to end up with money with no matter who we ended up with. For Anheuser-Busch, it was about values, core values for me. I'm at a point in my life and I'm at a point in my career where nothing is just about money anymore. I am very aligned, and I saw some other fucking asshole today saying, oh, it sounds like they wrote him a script on what to say. Nobody writes me a script. Nobody tells me what to say, ever. I do things because when I come out and I say something publicly, if you look at every quote, right, that I put out, you can ask Lene, every quote is me. Every quote is me. Everything that's posted on social media is me. And everything that comes out of this mouth is me. Nobody tells me what to say and nobody tells me what to do, ever. And the things that I said about Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light yesterday are absolutely true. I am a big military law enforcement guy. They have this Folds of Honor where they've spent $44 million over the last however many years. Fallen first responders and military people, their families get taken care of with this money, scholarships for their kids, etc. That is right up my alley. Almost $1 billion a year go to U.S. farmers for their crops, for their products. That is right up my alley. That's exactly who I am. 65,000 Americans are employed by Anheuser-Busch, and thousands of them are vets. Right up my alley. And I could keep going on and on forever and tell you why I am more aligned with Anheuser-Busch than any of the other beer companies.
Military, law enforcement, farmers, of course, I support them all like everybody else. But a lot of the people who said no to Bud Light were military, law enforcement, and, of course, farmers and people who are not okay with drag shows and the drag agenda and the pride agenda being put on kids. That's why they gave up Bud Light altogether. Really liking how the response was going, basically saying that those who objected to this were a bunch of idiots. By the way, he also went on Piers Morgan a while back. I'm trying to link that interview in the description box, where he talked about people and the country itself going soft. I would agree. I do think the country is going soft. However, you got to ask yourself a question: who in the world is this actually getting soft? Last I checked, it's the people who demand that you identify them as this right here or use their pronouns. Those right there are the ones who've gone extremely soft. Gen Z, which really, to tell you the truth, it's really more millennials with some of Gen Z. I actually have spoken to a lot of people, been around a lot of people who are Gen Z, who think the entire thing is a bunch of crap. And don't worry, we'll be speaking about Gen Z later on this week because there's another topic that's come up here recently. We got people out there who want to blame generations before them about why is their situation is so bad. But we'll be talking about that a little bit later on this week, probably on Saturday, or probably a much, much bigger video. And there's also the one that I need to get out there, probably on Wednesday, about this little fight that went on between Jason Whitlock and Matt Washington. This little disagreement about the current Speaker of the House, which, of course, also deals with the topic of systemic racism, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Here's the thing. Bud Light as a brand, they chose to cater and pander to the same weak, woke snowflakes that Dana White had talked about in this interview with Piers Morgan, even though that was not the one from Piers Morgan. This is who they chose to pander to, and the UFC, of course, has decided to enter into an agreement with them. Now, when I talked earlier about Anheuser-Busch standing for actual values at one point in time, and a lot of people on the lower level who still, of course, are good old-fashioned Americans who do, in fact, believe in this country and are not liberal or okay with this agenda at all, I wanted to go a little bit further. Yes, I do believe that Dana White is pro-military, and there's another guy who had a response and a reaction to this I'm going to play for you guys, who I think actually hit this on the head about Dana, but he also hit something else on the head. Let's go ahead and watch.
Anybody knows Midnight. You know I'm a huge fan of Dana White, and I'm a huge fan of the UFC. But when I watch this video going on, and Dana White is ranting and talking about what are the reasons why he lined up back with Bud Light, because he cares about farmers, because he cares about the American people, because he cares about veterans. And by the way, I know Dana White because I mutual friends. I know he cares about police officers and enforcement. I know he cares more about all that. But Midnight's got to call bull. If you think for a second that Dana White number one motive wasn't the $100 million because he's a money-making machine.
I believe that Dana is pro-military. I do believe that Dana is pro-law enforcement. I do believe that Dana is pro most American patriotic values. But the problem is this right here. Dana can try to justify this all he wants, but at the end of the day, I think this is really nothing more than a cash grab. I'm going to be leaving this video here in the description box from Napoleon Blown Apart. Now, his recent couple of videos have not been as great in my opinion, even though he's still one of my favorite commentators, not commentators, but content creators as far as MMA content on the platform. The guy's absolutely hilarious. The video, of course, is from CM Punk, but it also kind of explains Dana White's mindset, because if you were around at the time of the whole CM Punk ordeal, then you would know that Dana White brought him in after the situation happened with the WWE. It was really just a good old-fashioned cash grab, and that right there is what it feels like to me, that this is just yet another cash grab for Dana White. Obviously, money is definitely at play, and obviously you want to make some money, but still at the same time, do you want to sacrifice your brand by bringing in yet another tainted brand? I don't think that that is going to go over as well as you think, especially when we get to this next part. But before we get to the reaction from Strickland, I want people to know this right now. When a UFC fighter wins a belt, regardless of whether it's the light heavyweight championship, it's the heavyweight title, the middleweight, the welterweight, there's actually too many belts in the UFC. Now you've got strawweight and flyweight. Don't get me started. When people say things like, I'm going to put this certain company or this certain topic on blast, just know that they're only able to do it maybe once or twice a year at the end of whatever fight they're in. It's not a guarantee that they're going to win said fight. But let's go ahead and play this response before we get to the final response on this, because there's a lot more here than meets the eye.
Guys, I'm on my way to training, and I just found out Bud Light's a new sponsor. And goddamn, I applaud you guys. I am so fucking proud of you guys for doing the right things after that fuck up. You know how I feel about transgenders. I go fucking hard. Just what I do. I'm the biggest advocate of biological females. If I said my views on transgenders, I would get kicked off Instagram. But I could not fucking wait to pick up a big old fucking Bud Light can and fix you, Bud Light, because you guys are doing the right fucking thing. I, Sean Strickland, a representation of the American people, are going to fix you, Bud Light. Thank you for giving me money. Thank you for supporting my platform. I'm going to help you guys.
Strickland has become somewhat of a bit of a darling for a lot of reasons, somewhat of his views, stuff like that, some of the things he's posted on Twitter, but I'm going to go ahead and give you my honest opinion about Sean Strickland. Just because I agree with you on a topic, just because I agree with you on certain things, does not mean I like you as a person. I didn't like the guy he beat, Israel Adesanya, either, because I think Adesanya is fake. I advise you guys look into his entire background and all the stuff involving China and everything. I advise you guys look into it. But then again, though, Adesanya has also said some very, very base things, too. Just because you may be based on a topic does not mean that I actually like you, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the next part. Strickland had developed a bit of a reputation for being a fighter who talked a lot of trash before and after his fights, but yet his fights were unimpressive. It wasn't until recently that he started actually KOing people, and people were really shocked that he was able to dominate the fight with Adesanya the way he was able to do so. And many people viewed what he said as a bit of a troll on Bud Light, saying, I'm going to give them hell every time I go out there. I'm going to give them all kinds of crap every time they see me. I'm going to rub it in their faces. That's how people were actually looking at it. This way as a redemption towards the opportunity to fix Bud Light, which we'll talk about here in a second, because we got to ask the question, can it actually be fixed? Well, the thing about Strickland is this here. Strickland, once again, is one of those guys, and he's obviously taken the whole approach of trash-talking dickheads, obviously sell fights. They obviously put butts in the seats, and people show up to watch it. The problem is that Strickland was not exactly somebody that people really liked until right recently, which makes you wonder exactly how successful this little venture is going to be and whether it's actually got any actual teeth in it. I got one guy in my comment section calling it the ultimate, well, I can't say it here on YouTube or the connotation that's there because I'll probably get in trouble if I do. But the thing is this right here. We're not so sure exactly how far this is going to go because it looks good, it sounds good on the surface, everything that you're saying. But then again, though, given your actual track record, we're not so sure that this is going to end up being the case, especially given the fact that he was KO'd by Pereira, the guy who just may be facing him in his next fight. We're not entirely sure yet exactly how this is going to go because in the fight game, things do change. The person that I do want to see say something is Colby Covington about this because Colby Covington's like the whole MAGA thing is basically his gimmick. Jorge Masvidal has already left the company, so we really and truly don't know. But there's something I did want to say, especially as far as those reactions was concerned. You see, there was one guy in particular who mentioned that he thought that the fights were rigged, and a lot of people are starting to get turned off about that, especially given the UFC's recent merger and the WWE. People are starting to believe that this particular product is, in fact, well, scripted for entertainment like just about every other sport is. But then we get to somebody who's a little bit more casual and doesn't understand exactly how the UFC and fights work. Even though he does do a good job of reporting things, I don't know exactly how I feel about what I'm about to show you guys next.
Unclear what right things Bud Light did after the Mulvaney disaster, other than writing a fat check to the UFC. Let me break it down for you, Outkick. This dude goes on Twitter, and this is the point he's making. He said, I really want a Bud Light sponsorship. Yes, I like money, but I think it's a story of redemption. Either way, I'll go so hard on them my next fight, they will have to accept me or denounce me, and then we will know what they stand for. Holy crap. This dude has declared war on Bud Light. And sort of, what he's saying is, when he comes out at the next fight and speaks, he is going to make so many offensive statements, as he's already doing, that Bud Light is going to have to either break the contract, give USC all the money for nothing, or let his statement stand. Oh, man. This dude just gripped Bud Light by the walls and squeezed. Now, I don't know what their contract terms are, but when we found out that Bud Light was sponsoring UFC, I'm thinking, like, how many UFC guys they're gonna rag on Bud Light like crazy? Here's where it gets crazy. Here's the crazy thing. This dude figured it out. This dude's smart. I'm wondering about the Bud Light contract. Typically, here's how it works. In a lot of these business contracts, if someone says, hey, we're going to sponsor your event, we'll give you $1 million. You have a term. Okay, done. Signed a contract. The point of the contract is you can't break it. If you decide to change your mind, you're on the hook for the $1 million. There may be an escape clause of some sort, like if we agree to terminate, we'll pay a penalty of $250,000. This is a $100 million contract. And Dana White probably said to Bud Light, you realize what's going to happen if you do this. And Bud Light said, we have to do it. We're going to do it. And he's like, you're going to get backlash. It's going to be big news. And maybe Dana White understood this better than we did. A lot of people were ragging on Dana. I got to pause for a minute. I don't know what he can or can't say, but this may actually be the forced realignment of Bud Light that people have been asking for. When Sean Strickland and other MMA fighters come out and start making overt political statements that are shockingly offensive to the left, Bud Light can't do anything about it. Now, Bud Light hasn't apologized. They keep doubling down.
Tim said there sounds well and good. A lot of things that Sean Strickland said, sounds well and good. The problem is, go back to what I said before. The champion only fights twice a year. Maybe 3 times if somebody is called in or they need somebody to save a show. But how many times are you going to be able to get up at the end of the fight and call Bud Light out? How many times are you going to be able to do that in a year? You can tweet about it and it becomes problematic for that company, but of course I don't think that Anheuser-Busch corporate's really and truly going to care. As I've said before on multiple occasions, Anheuser-Busch could have avoided this entire situation if they had just came out and apologized. They never did that. They've still not apologized. Dana White could have found another company to go with that was not woke. He could have gone with Yingling. As a matter of fact, if he'd have gone with Yingling, that right there would have boosted your stock. But then again, at the same time, given the fact that the minute that Proper 12 came out, they started putting Proper 12 just about anywhere and everywhere inside the octagon. Fact of the matter is that Dana White's going to get whatever cash grab he can get, and I think this is an actual, honest-to-God, last-ditch effort by the UFC to try to give themselves some form of, by Bud Light to give them some form of credibility. Dana could very, very well be pumping up the brand, basically acting like I'm trying to save it, but then again, at the same time, and I know I say then again at the same time a lot, Bud Light, the UFC is not exactly, they're not exactly doing as well as you might would think. Like I said earlier, John Jones injury. You got Colby Covington fighting Leon Edwards. The people are going to show up just to fight Colby Covington, even though he more than likely is going to lose that fight. You don't have Jorge Masvidal, who wasn't really drawing anything when he was there. Conor McGregor doesn't fight very often. He is your biggest draw. He hasn't fought since he broke his leg in the fight against Dustin Poirier. And the Ultimate Fighter season with him and Chandler did not exactly get the views they thought it was going to get. Also, and one more last thing, the UFC's venture in Power Slap is not getting the views or the revenue that Dana thought it was going to get. I still say that this right here is really just a good old-fashioned last-ditch effort. Now, the whole thing about the UFC being first, especially when it came to COVID, people forget that WWE was running events too. Of course, they were enclosed, no fans, but still, they were running events as well. They continued to try. Football, of course, ended up having to no fans in the stands. I honestly thought you could get away with that as long as you just went by the certain guidelines. I didn't like the idea of masks and stuff, but still, the thing is this right here. This right here looks more to me like desperation than it is anything else. Bud Light's going to give you $100 million, and of course the fighters are going to go out there and they're going to trash your brand while they're out there. You're just going to take more heat and get insulted in the process. Some people may want to see that, but they're not going to buy the fights. They're just going to simply go to Twitter and look at the post-fight reactions. Go back to what I was saying about trash talking dickheads. Yeah, Sean Strickland is one of those, but he's not Conor McGregor. He's not even Michael Bisping. There's no way in hell you're going to be able to get anything out of him. And Bisping wasn't exactly the most popular star in the UFC either. He didn't begin to get the type of popularity until right before he took the belt away from Luke Rockhold. And it may have actually been the fight before that with Anderson Silva, but still at the same time, the UFC does not have the type of star power to kind of combat the Bud Light narrative to call out Bud Light outside of Sean Strickland. Who else is going to do it? I don't see anybody in the heavyweight division is going to do it. John Jones is out. He's going to be out for over a year. Also, to go on top of that, going back to what I was saying about people that showing you that clip of that guy who said that he thought that the fights were rigged. If you saw the Francis Ngannou-Tyson Fury fight this past weekend, chances are he got ripped off because it looks like Francis Ngannou really and truly won that fight. This was the buzz I've been getting. Through the highlights, I've been thinking, okay, it's very possible that maybe it was a very close fight. Maybe he did win. But then again, though, boxing's not really a serious sport anymore. It's been going down for a very long time. In the current roster of people at the UFC, it makes me wonder with it not being strong. I mean, look, guys, the UFC doesn't have George St. Pierre anymore. The UFC does not have a younger Anderson Silva. The UFC does not have an active Conor McGregor. The UFC does not have the star power to combat where they're losing. As I've said in the previous video, I honestly believe that this right here was just a good old-fashioned attempt at trying to get whatever cash they can. You need Anheuser-Busch, who's still got a lot of money to throw that out there. And as far as Dana White saying, well, I don't need any more money, it's not about the money. Okay, if it's not about the money, then why the hell would you sign the contract? Why the hell would you take $100 million from this company? You know, if you really and truly wanted to help yourself out with this, then maybe you could have gone with a different sponsor. I mean, I don't think right-wing dad beer is going to be able to get you over. Maybe Yingling, like I said before, maybe Coors Light, whose stock did not go down, even though they did kind of do the pride thing at one time, but their stock did not go down. Miller Lite, they did go with that whole woman thing and anti-men thing for a second here, but that kind of fizzled out pretty quick. I mean, can't go with Jack Daniels, can't go with Jim Beam because they also embrace the pride thing too, but you could have found another whiskey company besides Proper 12. I mean, there's a lot of different avenues that you could have gone with if this was not necessarily about the money. But it looks like it's pretty obvious that it is. And I really and truly believe that the reason why Dana White decided to sign this contract with these people was because he didn't care about the backlash. And, of course, this is one of those situations where not caring about the backlash is a situation, this right here, in this case right here, may backfire negatively. Normally, if you don't care about the backlash, it always helps you out on a positive note. It gives you the additional press. It gives you the additional dollars. People, in fact, do buy it. By the way, lefties and the audience and the consumer base that Bud Light was going for with the whole Dylan Mulvaney anything, they don't typically watch UFC. Every time you go to a UFC event, you see Donald Trump walk in there, the place goes absolutely crazy because it's mostly a conservative crowd that's watching the fights. A moderate to conservative crowd is watching these fights. The liberal crowd is not watching it. Like I said before, I think Dana White knew this, but he didn't really care because this is more of an act of desperation than anything else. He knows the company is falling apart. He knows that anybody and everybody who could have actually spent who was going to spend money to buy the events, they're no longer enamored to do so. Sean Strickland sounds good for about a month or two, but I can promise you his next fight, he'll probably get dropped. The guy was never really truly that great of a fighter. I think you guys are looking at this the completely wrong way. Those who are supporting Dana White aren't thinking about the possibility that this entire venture that he has is going to backfire in a very, very, very negative way, because the UFC does not have the current roster of star power to call out Bud Light. There are a lot of fighters out there who are going to call it out, but they're not going to get any real true name recognition because Dana will find a way to suppress them. He'll probably even come up with some brand new rule saying you can't insult this company. This was one case right here where I don't trust Dana White to actually let the fighters do what it is that they normally do, or what it is that they want to do, and actually be based. But we will see. With that right there being said, guys, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe, share the videos, sound off in the comment section. I'm going to get you guys' thoughts, and I'll see you guys later.